What's going on YouTube? It's Tej, back again with another video and back with another 2023 NFL mock draft. And today we're going to use the PFF mock draft simulator. Just wanted to give it a little bit of a different look. And speaking of different looks, today we're going to go ahead and start using these sidebars. I don't know if I'll use them for, my own personal content, but when we're reacting to other mock drafts and big boards and things like that, it makes it really easy to put the video up into frame here, which you can see me pointing to. But let me know what you think. Do you like these sidebars? Should I keep them for my regular videos, my power rankings, all that sort of stuff? Love to have your feedback, and, people like it, then I'll continue to use it. So let's go ahead and jump right into it, start talking about this 2023 mock draft. Same place as I normally like to start here. It's going to be Bryce Young. I think he's QB1. Houston needs a quarterback. We won't drone on too much about this one. It just makes a ton of sense. It fits their winning window. And then we get to the Chicago Bears, and it's really frustrating sometimes when you have a good idea that comes to mind, right? And you're really excited to talk about it, and then you hear other people talking about it. And it's like, okay, that kind of dampens it. But I actually heard some other people kind of talking about this fit if the Bears do hold the number 2 overall pick. Trading back makes a ton of sense. Which, speaking of that, by the way, I think my next mock, I'm going to include some trades, maybe just one, maybe it's 2 in there, but I'm really kind of intrigued by the idea of the Colts going up and getting a quarterback, so we might run through those scenarios as well. But let's just say in this scenario, Chicago decides to stay at 2. We saw Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles try to sign, Larry Ogunjobi last year to a big contract. He fails his physicals. That 3 tech is huge. And I mean, the trade for DeForest Buckner in Indianapolis, that was a Matt Eberflus call. Jalen Carter could easily be that 3 tech and that disruptor there in the middle. I also like the idea of Will Anderson. I don't think you can go wrong with either one of those two, but just given we've already seen this organization try to land that 3 tech, let's give him Jalen Carter. And then we get to the Detroit Lions, and this will upset some Lions fans, and I understand. But over the last 2 or 3, I think the last 2 mocks, I've either not gone quarterback until the second round, or I haven't gone quarterback in general. And I think maybe Jared Goff's live here, but let's just say in this world, it's CJ Stroud as the pick at 3. I'm trying to run through different scenarios, right, and see how the board could change and play out. But ultimately, it's 2 years of Jared Goff, and when you look at that Stafford-Goff trade, it goes from, okay, you swapped Stafford for Goff and got more first-round picks. That's good for a new GM and Brad Holmes. But if one of those picks isn't a quarterback, like, what are you doing long-term? So when you then phrase the argument as Stafford became Goff for a little bit, then our hopeful franchise quarterback in a top 3 selection in CJ Stroud, especially considering that pick came from the Rams, that makes it that much easier of an argument in a sell, and it makes the trade, I think, just look a little bit better. So you've had 2 years of Goff. I think this is the next step in the rebuild. Go ahead and land that quarterback. And, I know that defense is atrocious, but the more points your offense put on the board, which it's an offense that's already put on a lot, I understand, that's better. The longer they can have, the ball on their side, the longer they control possession, obviously helps the defense too. I just think this team has holes on both sides of the ball, really. Quarterback is the most important position in football. Get better there, and then we'll continue to address the defense with my other selections. So moving on now, let's talk about the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, Will Anderson, just an absolute home run pick here. Yeah, you have Boye Mafe from last year. Tenor Nwosu's playing good football, but next year will be his last year of his deal. So there's a place on the field there for Will Anderson. So if you're a Seattle, you're totally content with that selection. Then we get to the Carolina Panthers. I know there's going to be it's going to be interesting to see what the rhetoric around Will Levis continues to develop into being. He feels like he's going to be the most polarizing prospect this year. I like him from a tools perspective, but it is unfortunate that we didn't get to see more of that at Kentucky. Now, granted, I'm a big Josh Allen guy. We didn't see a whole lot of him at Wyoming. That was like, wow, that guy is just a stud. The Wyoming was not in the top 25 for a reason, right? So, give and take, and at least, you could say Levis is doing it in the SEC, but I just think it's going to take, the right offensive mind saying, hey, that dude's got a rocket for an arm. He's got enough mobility. He's willing to take hits. We can fix the accuracy. I'm going to take that shot on him. So would have loved to see, if the Giants weren't as good as they are this year, they're a team that I think Brian Daboll, I'd love to see him work with Will Levis, not just because the Josh Allen kind of comparison so just because I think that's a guy that can bring him along nicely. We'll see what Carolina decides to do with their next OC/head coach, what the play caller is going to be, and, their philosophy with quarterback. But, here I think Will Levis comes to you at 5. That's the position you need, right? Like, that's how you slingshot a rebuild. Couple of nice defensive additions as well. Continue to ensure the offensive line's in a good spot. I think the Panthers will be in a good place moving forward if, Levis were to pan out, of course. Then we get to the Philadelphia Eagles, and this continues to be a pick I love to make at the top of the board. You could totally go Brian Brzee because, right, Fletcher Cox is getting older. Javon Hargrave last year of his contract, he's got a couple void years tacked on, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. So you could go Brzee here, pair him up with Jordan Davis and Milton Williams already there. But let's just say, hey, they just made a trade for a speed rusher and Robert Quinn. So let's just go ahead and land another one in Myles Murphy. I think it makes all the sense in the world. And I think long term, they're probably that one more edge away for the next 5 years, not really having to worry about it. So let's go ahead and grab one there, the top 6. And also, maybe my next mock, I'm kind of throwing around the idea of, Joey Porter Jr., Christian Gonzalez, Akili Ringo, one of those top tier corners, going here at 6 as opposed to what I'm going to end up doing here. Just because the edge group, I think, has a little bit more depth, where the quarterback group, I'm not entirely sold there's a top 10 guy. If you saw my big board a couple weeks ago, I think I had Ringo at 9. So right there on the fringe. But this edge group is so deep that you'll easily be able to find a pretty decent option at 32, whether it's Isaiah Foskey, Felix and DK Uzama, maybe a Jared Verse falls that far. I'm doubting that, but you get my point. But here, let's go edge, and then we're going to ultimately go, corner once we get to 31. Next up, the Arizona Cardinals. Speaking of Jared Verse, again, I don't see him falling all that far. Once I can find him, here he is. The Cardinals need edge. They also need corner for sure. Byron Murphy is going to be a free agent next year. I think they bring him back, even if it's a whole new regime. I think you'd be crazy to let a corner in their mid-20s who has gone from a really good nickel to proving he can play on the outside and hold his own against DK Metcalf and Devontae Adams. I think you're crazy to let that guy walk in his mid-20s. So I think no matter what, Byron Murphy's back, regardless of what the front office changes might be, if there are any. So let's go ahead and grab Jared Verse, the difference maker there on the edge, and then we'll kind of figure out that cornerback group as we move along. Then we get to the Green Bay Packers. I continue to do this, so sorry, Packers fans. I know this is so boring, but part of it is like, these guys are going to come off the board. I just need to find that right spot win. But also, you're looking for more pass catching help. So, Michael Mayer makes a ton of sense here. Honorable mention to Peter Skoronski, who could be, day one starter at left guard and be a really solid pass protector. Obviously, we'll talk about Skoronski here in a little bit in this first round portion of this video, but I decided to go Michael Mayer still, but, I promise I'll change it up next time around. I've also done Addison, but I've been pretty heavy on the pass catchers because, have you watched Green Bay play this year? It's clearly their biggest weakness, that and run defense. So let's move on to the Raiders now. This is where I'm going to have Brian Brzee come off the board. For years now, I've been mocking an interior disruptor to the Vegas Raiders, previously the Oakland Raiders, So maybe this is the year, right? And I love Brian Brzee. I've said it multiple times. Once we get out of the combine, I think people are going to be, the trendy move is going to have him over, Jalen Carter, kind of like Zach Wilson to Trevor Lawrence a couple years back. Unless I don't think you can go wrong. Freak athlete, highly touted recruit, and we're seeing the play there at Clemson. You can play him in a 3-tech. I think that's his best spot at the NFL level, but with some position flexibility, I think once you get into passing downs, maybe play him right over the center. I'd love to see that type of mismatch, depending on who obviously that center is, but just get that guy in the middle and hope that gets that much more out of Chandler Jones. You made a big investment in, and then Max Crosby continues to play at a high level, and hopefully that pass rush makes the secondary look better, yada, yada, yada. You've heard me say this 1,000 times before. Next up's the Houston Texans, second pick, and if we go back, we gave him Bryce Young at 1. Let's go ahead and give him wide receiver 1 of the future, Quentin Johnston. I think Johnston right now, it could go either way, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. I think Johnson has a little bit more of the covetable traits you'd want in a wide receiver, but Addison's just ready to roll right now, so we'll talk about Addison in a little bit. But maybe I'd give that edge to Johnston. I'm just intrigued by his upside and what his traits say he can be. But in this spot here for Houston, it's already, Brandon Cooks is probably going to be traded this offseason, so left with Nico Collins and who else long term. So need to invest in that position and get two offensive weapons, right? Quarterback and wide receiver in the top 10. Houston's fan base are going to be over the moon, I think, with that. Next up, the Jacksonville Jaguars. A little bit of a different fit here, but this team definitely could use another corner, right? As great as, Tyson Campbell's been this year, let's pair him up with another Georgia corner, Keely Ringo, because, Darius Williams, playing in the nickel, might I add, has not looked good. And Shaq Griffin is a prime cut candidate in cap casualty next year. We're actually talking about a few of those guys here in this video. Those players who just make sense to move on from and, get a little bit of a savings against the cap. I totally think Shaq Griffin is one of those guys. Therefore, you have a starting position on the outside. Maybe you want to move Williams out there. You paid him a decent amount of money this past offseason, but you could also just go draft a guy at 11. And, this guy's going to run in the 4.3s, be 6'2", have these long arms, pair him up with Tyson Campbell, who, maybe not as big and as long-armed and maybe not as fast, but who's proven to be a great prospect and was one of those traitsy guys that went to the top of the second round and ultimately has panned out for the Jags. So let's go pair him up. And if it works out, those two corners could make a very formidable duo. Then we get to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm going to go with my OT1. I also do want to note, I think he'll still be in here. Nope, they've already taken him out. Oh, there he is. Olu Fashanu has decided to go back to Penn State. If you're familiar with the NFL draft cycle, this is news already you're familiar with, which is unfortunate because he was going to be, little insider baseball, I'm working on my updated draft rankings position-wise, and he was going to be OT2. He was going to be right behind Paris Johnson Jr., so really unfortunate from a draft, mock drafter perspective, but I think he could really slingshot if it works out right, because this is his first year as starter. If he has a 2-year sample size of just being awesome and getting that much better as well, he goes from a tackle that top 10 probably is about where I'd put him, top 10 to 15 to potential top 5 pick, next year. So we'll see how the class shakes out. There's a fair amount of quarterbacks that could go early, so that could totally skew it. But kind of like how we saw Penei Sewell as a top 5 guy, top 5 pick worthy type of selection. I could totally see Olu Fashanu kind of working his way up there. But here for the Steelers, I'm going to go Paris Johnson Jr. Dan Moore had a nice performance, PFF grade wise, but most of that was, I think that was like 2 weeks ago. Most of that was from his run blocking. They just got to get a better pass protector on that blind side and helped out Kenny Pickett, right? You get your franchise quarterback in the first round one year, go ahead and bookend tackle the next year. I think it makes a ton of sense there. So let's go Paris Johnson Jr. here. Then we get to the Lions, and I'm actually going to stick to the cornerback position. Actually, not sticking to it, but going back to the well with the cornerback position. I'm going to go Christian Gonzalez, higher than I've ever had him go in these mock drafts, but the more I get to watch Oregon, the more I just start to fall in love with his game. And I think a lot of NFL teams are probably on the same wavelength because he's got ideal size. He'll probably run 4.3s, maybe at worst low 4.4s, super long arms, more than likely man-heavy corner at the NFL level, but I'm interested to see if he has that flexibility to move into zone. I think he's got great break on the ball, so that could lend his skills nicely to that type of scheme. But, from a Detroit perspective, taking the scheme out of it, it's just like Amani Oruwariye has fallen off a cliff in his production and play. You need to give some help to Jeff Okudah. So let's go ahead and get that that other starting boundary corner. I'm not going to say he's going to be the number one because I still have a lot of faith in Okudah, but you'll get another starting boundary corner, and we went quarterback early. Hopefully that helps, maintain consistency on the offensive side. Now let's go get a defensive, blue chip piece there, and Christian Gonzalez. Next up, we get the Indianapolis Colts. I'm going to have Nolan Smith. Obviously, he's still out for the year. We'll see what that torn pec and what the medical looks like once we get to Indy, but I don't really see that holding him back or anything here. So I think ultimately he'll get the green light and he'll be good to go, and he'll be this freak athlete that shows out at the combine. So those types of dudes go early. So, and also I think this year at Georgia, he really turned into a high-level run defender, which is typically a pretty good sign of showcasing development and skills that will transfer to the NFL level. Sure, he needs to become a more consistent pass rusher, win in different ways, but there's enough pieces there to where I think he's worth taking that shot on. And I look at the Colts defensive line, it's like Kwity Paye's pretty good, but he's a better run defender than he is a pass rush. You have DeForest Buckner there in the middle, but they're still looking for another guy on the other side. So even if Nolan Smith's just another good run stopper and a good athlete on one edge, then you have basically the same thing on the other side with Kwity Paye. So no matter what, I think it kind of creates a more balanced defensive front, and it's just a position group that they need to get better at. Sure, they could totally go quarterback here, but don't love the value. Moving on to 15 with the Atlanta Falcons now. Going to stick to the edge group here. Tyree Wilson, I just think this makes a ton of sense, and especially when you compare his skill sets to this guy who's super, long-armed is the number one thing that kind of comes to mind, but that big body frame at like 6'6", it's a nice compliment to a guy like Arnold Ebiketie, who took in the second round, who's more that speed, finesse rusher. So I like having complementing edge rushers with one who can win with, length or power, one who can win with speed. And I think this kind of puts Atlanta in a spot they could do that. And also, they're just not good enough pass rush. And then also Tyree Wilson, who knows it? Because he is big enough. Could you kick him inside? Like maybe move Grady Jarrett into, pass rushing situations here. Nose tackle, and then Tyree Wilson becomes a 3-tech. I'd be interested to see what that looks like, and then that allows you to play D'Angelo Malone on one edge and then Arnold Ebiketie on the other. However they want to shake it out and however Dean Pease is going to draw it up. I think Wilson gives you that flexibility and kind of creates a lot of different interesting pass rush opportunities for him. Next up, Seattle Seahawks. Now, I've done this pick before in mocks, and, Seahawks fans, let me just say this in general. I love when fan bases let me know, this team doesn't normally do this, and, our GM doesn't typically, like body types like that, or whatever the case may be. But I'm going to go back to Joey Porter Jr. here. Now, I know Seattle doesn't have a track record of normally taking first-round corners, but I think when you see that defense get torn apart by the Raiders, right, last week, a lot of that was on the ground. Sure, Josh Jacobs goes bananas. Totally could see where, that's the area of focus. But I also think they could use one more corner. And I think this puts you in a world where Joey Porter at 6'2" has gotten better year over year at Penn State. And obviously good lineage. Dad played in the NFL, whatever. 6'2" corner on one side, Tariq Woolen 6'4" on the other. Just you're throwing at pterodactyls at that point. Like, good luck. And then Kobe Bryant, every time I watch the Seahawks, I leave that game more impressed than I am concerned about Kobe Bryant. So, especially as a nickel corner, I think that'd be a really good fit for him. And I think that kind of solidifies that secondary because Jamal Adams ideally comes back healthy. Quandre Diggs is already a good player. They got another guy in the mix who's been pretty good and grading really well for PFF. So, that secondary all of a sudden looks really, really good. And we've already given them, a top-tier defensive player back at 4 with Will Anderson. So all of a sudden that defense starts to look really, really good. Maybe a linebacker away, which, they had the whole entire offseason figured out. And hey, Roquan Smith, maybe. That could be an interesting fit. But anyways, I like Joey Porter Jr. there at 16 just to give you two massive long-armed corners and just make it a nightmare to face those guys week in and week out if you're a quarterback. Okay, next up, the LA Chargers. This is where I have Jordan Addison come off the board. I mean, best route runner in the class, and I'm not sure it's necessarily close right now. And also great downfield speed. Just a little bit smaller than a Quentin Johnston, and maybe not as good of a high point kind of guy when in the air. But this is the guy that the Chargers need, right? Like, I mean, this is the guy where Mike Williams can win downfield, but it's in contested catch spots. Addison's the Chris Olave kind of type of wide receiver this year, where he gets open because he's a great route runner and he can set up DBs really, really well. So love to add that type of not only speed, but also that ability and way he wins into this offense. And then Keenan Allen kind of plays the underneath intermediate stuff. He's a crisp route runner as well. And all of a sudden, it feels like that offense opens up a ton. And ideally, then Joe Lombardi and Justin Herbert take the next steps and they're pushing the ball down the field that much more. Next, the New England Patriots. I'm going to go Peter Skoronski here. So it might be a little surprising that he falls all the way down to 18. You're like, TJ, well, this is one of the best players in the draft, and you had him at tackle 1 in the preseason. Yeah, I think if Olu Fashanu was in this class, he'd probably be my tackle 3. Now he'll probably solidify in that tackle 2. I'm gonna put him in my interior group, right? Because rumor is, Dave Brugler even was talking about it from The Athletic. Follow his stuff if you don't already. 32.25-inch arms, maybe 32.5. And that 33-inch mark that's a hard cutoff for a lot of teams. So I could see him losing a ton of interest. And if you're on half, if you're immediately taking off half the NFL teams' boards, you go from 16 teams potentially looking at you to 16, and naturally supply and demand. Then those teams know that and they're aware of that, and they'll make you wait. So that's kind of a tough sell there. And also, I think with those arms, right tackle to left guard, that's kind of where he's penciled in. Now, there are players who I think can transcend those body frame benchmarks and requirements. I'm not sure Skoronski is, right? Like he's playing really well at Northwestern, but I'm not entirely sure at the NFL level he'll be able to overcome that arm length deficit. So ideally, I think he plays left guard. And now I know Patriots fans are saying, hey, we just took Cole Strange. I think one way or another, this works out perfectly. I think Isaiah Wynn's gone. I mean, he's been shocked pretty heavily. More than likely, he's gone. So right now you have Michael Onwenu playing right guard. I think you kick him over to play right tackle. You can keep Trent Brown at left tackle. And then it's Skoronski sliding in to play left guard. You flip Cole Strange over to right guard. Simple as that. Or you can play Skoronski at right tackle if you think he can hold out a tackle, and then there you go. You're done. No other tweaks to be made. So I think this is just a team that, Bill Belichick, offensive line or defense. That's typically where he's going in the first round. So let's go offensive line here, and they get one of the better players available, in my opinion, despite my criticisms and my concerns about his arm length. Next is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I'm going to go Brian Branch here. I think they let Sean, if it comes down to Jamel Dean, Sean Murphy Bunting, I think you sign Jamel Dean because I think he's playing really, really good. And he plays on the perimeter, right? Which is just naturally a little bit more valuable in my opinion. So Sean Murphy Bunting walks, you lose the slot corner. Well, insert Brian Branch and watch that defense not lose a beat. But also a guy who super versatile. So I'd love to see a defense that has both Antoine Winfield Jr. and Brian Branch. And, one time, one of those guys is in the nickel, the other one's playing strong. And then the next play could be completely flipped. And then all of a sudden, Antoine Winfield Jr. is playing free safety. Creating that type of confusion for an opposing quarterback, where these guys are lining up and how they're going to be played and where they're rotating and what their assignment is. So you generate turnovers. And this is a team that needs pass rush, too. So any back-end confusion you can create, I think goes a long way for Tampa Bay. So I love the addition of Brian Branch. More versatility and also just a great football player in and of itself. Then sticking on a similar wavelength here for Washington. I don't love this selection. This is another team where I'd love to see Skoronski fall to them. But I'll go Antonio Johnson from Texas A&M. He's a little bit of a falling star right now. But I still believe in the talent. And where Branch maybe has a little bit more explosiveness and speed and plays for Alabama versus A&M. So he's being coached up by Saban versus Jimbo Fisher, who I'm starting to really lose a lot of faith in as a developer, given where A&M's been. Anyways, another conversation for another day. Antonio Johnson has 6'3", 220 on his resume, and, that's pretty impressive. So another one of these nickel corner, strong safety types. And Washington doesn't really need a strong safety because I think Cameron Curl's already that dude. I think he's one of the better box safeties in the league. And now Derek Forrest is kind of taking over that free safety spot. So this is where I've kind of lost some of the attraction. I used to love this fit back when, Washington was, projected to fit right around 10 in the mock draft. So I liked it more then, but it's a nickel corner, but also gives you that flexibility just in case of injuries. I think that makes sense. Outside corner maybe could be in play here, but I've been really impressed with Benjamin St. Juste. I think he's had some big games and really showed up pretty well against the Eagles and A.J. Brown and that big upset win for them. So I'm not entirely sure corner's going to end up being a need, but you can never have too many corners. This is just going to be an interesting class to try to find one. Anyways, let's move on to the Baltimore Ravens now. I don't think he goes in the first round, if I'm being honest. Right now, if I were to say, I'd say Jackson Smith-Njigba is not a first-round player. He's just not a high-end athlete. And, again, going back to Dave Brugler, he's here, and some teams have a third-round grade on him. And given his athletic ability, and it's all about athletes in the NFL, I mean, that doesn't really surprise me. I kind of see him more as a day 2 pick who kind of has a high floor. But nonetheless, let's just run through a scenario here where Baltimore's like, hey, dude, this guy is a high football IQ dude, crisp route runner. And if we just play him in the slot and kind of let him be a Juju Smith-Schuster type, let's just say that's kind of his role, which keep in mind, Baltimore is interested in Juju Smith-Schuster when he's being a free agent both times. But let's just say he's just kind of that underneath intermediate, not a high-end athlete, but he kind of does the easy stuff and is another weapon over the middle of the field, just like Mark Andrews, where Lamar Jackson's really good. And then Rashad Bateman's our number 1 wide receiver. He works the outside. He can stretch the field. He can work the intermediates. He can work outside the hashes or cut back through the middle of the field. And then you have, Devin Duvernay or someone like that as the burner working over the top, but also taking the jet sweep stuff and the yak components. Okay, I look at that wide receiver room and I see a lot of guys who win a lot of different ways. So I could be convinced. Just right now, I don't think JSN's the first round player. And hey, I did my big board 2 weeks ago. He was outside the top 32. Now, granted, he would have probably been 33 or 34, but he was outside the top 32. So I'm not entirely sold yet, but here for something different, let's go JSN at 21 to the Ravens, who obviously need another wide receiver. Let me get to the Jets. I'm going to do a best fits for every team, and I just can't see another player I like more for the Jets than Trenton Simpson. I mean, this is Robert Saleh getting his Fred Warner. Now, I'm not saying Trenton Simpson is going to be Fred Warner because obviously there's a ton of variables there, but he has that potential, and that's kind of the one missing piece from that defense. Maybe they could add one more safety, like a true free over-the-top guy, but you add Trenton Simpson in the middle of that defense, my God, they're going to go from really, really good to certainly elite stats, maybe my number 1 defense next year. So we'll see. Obviously, a lot of other things that can change. But linebacker body with the safety skill set, I mean, that even sounds like Fred Warner, right? So love that fit there for the Jets, and I just think it makes a ton of sense. Now we get on to the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm going to do a little something different here, and I do have an argument for why I think this is plausible. Let's go Bijan Robinson. Now, I know Bengals fans are going to be like, but Joe Mixon, that's fine. But if you look at Joe Mixon's contract, if the Bengals were to cut him next year, they'd save almost $7.5 million against the cap. That's just next year. Then the year after that, they'd be saving about $10.5 million. So there's a lot of potential savings by moving on from a Joe Mixon win. Also, next year is the last year of Joe Burrow's rookie contract, which, is he going to play on that? I mean, if he does, that's the last year that you got him for cheap, because him and Herbert and obviously Tua at this point as well probably work himself in that conversation. All their, clientele, their representation are going to be working to get a contract done this offseason. So you're about to have to start paying Burrow, and not too far behind having to pay Jamar Chase and maybe even T. Higgins. So anytime you can save $7.5 million against the cap, especially for a running back, I think you got to jump on that. And then $10.5 million a year, I think you got to pounce on that. So why not go get cheaper at that position? Now, granted, first-round running backs tend to make a decent amount of money when you compare the entire pool of where money goes for running backs, but it'd still be a cap savings. And, you look at Joe Mixon, it's like he's a solid runner who can catch the ball in the backfield. Well, I think that's a pretty safe floor to say what Bijan Robinson is going to be. If you've watched any Texas game, that dude takes over whenever he wants. So if anything, it might even be a talent upgrade. If Bijan lives up to the hype, it might be a talent upgrade, but also coming at a cap saving, which I think you have to do when you're soon going to be paying Burrow and you're soon going to be paying Chase. And also, this type, if it is an upgrade, that type of an upgrade becomes so key, because let's say they sign Burrow and Chase but can't keep Higgins. You got to find where that offensive production is going to come from. It's not just, okay, well, now Higgins is gone and we're going to be fine. Okay, well, where are those targets going? Where are those yards coming from? Where are those touchdowns coming from? I think Bijan Robinson, if he does live up to the hype, could be potentially better than Joe Mixon. Also could be healthier, right? Because less NFL experience, and also Joe Mixon's just battled injuries throughout his career. That could be one of the ways you kind of fill in some of that production. So if you're a Bengals fan, let me know what you honestly think. Would you be in on this? I feel like Cincy fans really like Joe Mixon, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Anyways, let me leave that tangent. Let's start talking about the New York Giants. I'm going to have him go wide receiver Josh Downs here. Kayshon Boutte is certainly in play. I just think Downs played better, right? Boutte really hasn't taken that next step forward as a junior. But Downs, even the last couple of weeks, he's been hurt for UNC, and it's been kind of evident that he's hurt. The offense still runs for him. And that's kind of why I think you see Drake May taking a little half step back for the last couple of weeks in regards to his efficiency and even just the overall stats. It's because Josh Downs is hurt. But I look at this guy. Can he play on the outside? Maybe not. But if you keep Darius Slayton around, you can find that other outside body. And then Josh Downs could be this super electric yards after the catch weapon out of the slot, but also a guy who has great downfield speed and become a weapon to stretch the field with whoever is going to be the quarterback next year for the New York Giants. So I like this fit, and it's a team that I haven't really mocked a wide receiver yet to, despite it's a huge need, and it's going to be something that I think they have to consider here in the first round. This wide receiver class, though, is a little tough. I just don't think it's as good as it has been in years past, but like Downs there, and you get some speed, you get some yak, all things I think Brian Dable will be able to take advantage of. So next is the Denver Broncos. I'm going to actually go Cam Smith here. If you're a Broncos fan, you're probably saying, tackle certainly in play, but I've also done tackle a ton when it comes to Denver in these mocks. So that could certainly be in play. Maybe edge, but I don't know. Randy Gregory, Baron Browning, Nick Benito. I think you already got a pretty nice rotation there. So I decided to go corner. You have Ronald Darby, who's hurt right now, but do you need to bring him back? And also I look at Cam Smith, this very fluid, 6 foot, 190 pound corner who I think has the ability to go get guys to the line of scrimmage, but even if you just play him in, off coverage, cover 4 essentially, he'd be great in that. And then pairing him up with Pat Surtain, that defense has already been great. And that secondary in a lot of ways has already been very good. It just gets that much better if you insert a Cam Smith, and he is a first-round talent at cornerback. So love to pair up a guy who can help out Patrick Surtain and force offenses to say, hey, I'm either going to throw at Surtain or I'm going to throw at Smith or attack the nickel, of course. But you get my point. So love to add this. And plus, this is a Denver roster where outside of Russell Wilson and, head coach Nathaniel Hackett, there's a lot that's already working for him. Maybe wide receivers in play here as well. Next up, the Tennessee Titans. I'm going to go offensive line. I feel like I end up doing this almost every time. Let's go Broderick Jones. Dennis Daly is just not good. And another one of those players where you can cut next offseason and save some money is Taylor Lewan. And he's on the wrong side of 30. He's battling injuries. Basically missed this entire season. I think that makes a ton of sense to clear, I think, almost $10 million in cap. So I think Lewan's going to end up being gone. And he'll probably make a decent amount of money in free agency just because there's a shortage of tackles. And maybe that's enough incentive for Tennessee to keep him around. But I just look at the cap savings and again his age and the injury history. I think it's time to part ways. You can get younger and cheaper at that position and then let someone else pay Lewan $18 million a year and let that be their headache. That's kind of my mindset here. And Broderick Jones has been good this year at Georgia. Sure, maybe not elite, but I think he's been good. First year starter at tackle there for the Bulldogs, at least season long starter at that position. So I think he's kind of just now hitting his stride. A little bit older. I think he's only allowed 4 pressures this year when I last looked. That was probably about a week ago. So maybe a little bit more, maybe 1 more pressure allowed, but only giving up like 4 pressures, no sacks in a year. I'd say that's pretty damn good, especially when you're in the SEC. Next up's the Dallas Cowboys. I would just adore this fit. I do have one question about how it could potentially work, but Siaki Ika, Dallas has just been looking for this. Quincy Bohanna is not it, as in regards to being a run stopper. This guy is 350 pounds and will eat space. He will just eat space there in the middle, which I think just allows you to play that much more free with Micah Parsons and even Leighton Vander Esch, right? Makes their job a little bit easier, knowing that someone there in the middle is going to clog it up. My only concern is with how much Dan Quinn has been using stunts. It's like, is he a guy that can be rotated into that? Like, can Siaki Ika do? I think he's taking steps forward as a pass rusher, but he's not doing that working to his left or right. So, may not be the best fit from that perspective. But okay, in that spot, then Siaki Ika's your first and second down, DT, and in passing situations, you're figuring something else out. He's coming off the field until you feel like he can, fit into those stunts and twists. And then you have some time, but minimum. The Cowboys are a team that's competing for a Super Bowl, right? Like that's their goal this year. So those little specialist roles can make a huge difference, and they can move the needle just enough to kind of get you up and over that hump. So even if Ika doesn't really fit into all those stunts, I think as a space-eating, run-stopping nose in the middle, I think that's valuable and worthwhile at 27 in and of itself. Next, Buffalo Bills. I'm going to go with Cyrus Torrence here. I might have done this in the last mock I did. He's just the best interior offensive lineman in this class. He's been really impressive this year at Florida, both pass protection and run protection. So he could go even higher than 28, but Roger Saffold's not been great. So I think this makes sense. Plug and play left guard. Dolphins are obviously forfeiting their picks. And then we get to the Minnesota Vikings. Go a little bit of a project there at edge and Andre Carter II. Kind of feels like a similar edge rusher than Zadarius Smith, but that Zadarius Smith contract was kind of essentially built to be a 1-year deal. He's been the better of the 2 edge rushers, though, between him and Daniil Hunter, so it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. If Hunter leaves, then it's Zadarius and Andre Carter II, who are kind of similar types. I don't love that as much, but nonetheless, this team needs to get some young talent and some developmental pieces there across the defensive line. They've taken swings at that at edge, but none in the first round. And so for Minnesota, I just think it makes a ton of sense, right? Like, finally use a first-round asset on a guy who is 100% a freak athlete. 6'7", 260, can play right through an offensive tackle. Sure, plays at a lower level, so there might be a little bit of a translation lag, if you want to call it that, going from academy school to the NFL. But I think all the pieces are there. So if they can work their magic with Daniil Hunter, this guy could totally be a freak. Next up's the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm going to stick to the edge group. I'm going to go Felix and DK Uzama. This edge group is deep. I mean, I think there's dudes, I mean, even in the top of the second round, the first pick of the second round is a player who I totally think can go in the first round. But, I think adding that speed type opposite of George Karlaftis, again, complementing edge sets and skill sets, I think makes a ton of sense, but also just great get off on the line. A guy who should go in the first round given his, athletic ability and his burst off the line. So, a little bit smaller, so may not be the best run defender, but then when you look at that Chiefs defensive line and it's Karlaftis, you can win with power and size and hand strength in specific. And then Indiki Ozama with finesse and speed on the other end, and then it's Chris Jones there in the middle. All of a sudden, you look at that defensive front, and now they've added a Brandon Williams. I don't know if he's a long-term fix, but whatever. All of a sudden, you look at that Chiefs defensive line, it's like, okay, that is something that we have to account for and game plan around, right? Like that's actually a legitimate unit. And if we're going to be playing from behind, we got to be able to have an answer against that type of a pass rush. So that's exactly the world I think if you're a Kansas City fan, you want to have teams living in. And then last pick of the first round, I'm going to go Clark Phillips here. Maybe a little undersized. I'll be interested to see what the arm length is. But, man, I just love this guy who could, I think, makes a ton of sense as a James Bradbury replacement. Or if they bring back Bradbury on another one-year deal, Clark Phillips kind of sits, learns, and waits in the wing. A little bit smaller, like I said, but really instinctual and turnover-creating machine at points of this season. So, had like 4 turnovers over this 2-week span. And he's doing it, I know Utah may not have a whole lot of name value, but that's a good team. That's a good defense for that point. Devin Lloyd just went in the first round last year, so that's a program that's kind of turning a corner and getting NFL talent out in the world. So I love Clark Phillips. I think he's sticky in man coverage even, so I think there's a lot of things to like about him. It'll be interesting to see what those measurables come in. But, a team that plays a whole lot of zone, I think Clark Phillips could thrive for, Jonathan Gannon if he is still the DC next year. Next is the Houston Texans, and this is the player I was talking about. I think Isaiah Foskey could easily be a first-round pick. I wouldn't have been surprised if he was a first-round pick last year for that point. So, I look at the Houston Texans and, Jonathan Grenard, unfortunately, hasn't taken that next step forward, and neither has Ogbonnaya Okoronkwo, and, it's kind of Jerry Hughes kind of carrying the load, and that's just not what you want to have moving forward. So, Texans got to get an answer there. They need a tone center there on the edge. They need a dude who's going to eventually develop into a double-digit type of sack guy. If this team wants to be a playoff competitive team in 2 years, they're going to need a dude like that. So, hopefully Isaiah Foskey can develop into a dude like that. Also, I don't know if they keep, the Lovie Smith defense, but, let's be honest with ourselves. Nickel becomes more and more the base defense in the NFL. And I think this guy is the hand of the dirt edge rusher. I think he'll be a great player at the NFL level. And I think a really good value there at quote unquote 32, first pick of the second round. Not weird. Not often you get to see that. Then we get to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm going to go with a different name here. I haven't talked a whole lot about Jalen Jones. Awesome athlete. And it's 6'2", great size as well. Another one of those guys where it's like, man, I just love to see him get coached up a little bit more at A&M. So he hasn't really taken that next step forward, but I think there's so many traits you can work with, and he feels instinctual, which that's kind of a subjective opinion once you watch him and once you watch A&M. But it'd be interesting once the season ends and I get the ability to kind of dive more into it if I still feel that way versus just watching the games. But I think the potential's there. And top of the second round, I look at a Steelers cornerback room, and it's like, Cam Sutton's okay, Levi Wallace is fine, but on next year's his last year of his 2-year contract he just signed last offseason. And then there's Akella Witherspoon, who's already been bounced out of the team that drafted him. So long term, there's not a guy there for Pittsburgh. So go take a flyer on a guy who has so many traits and checks so many boxes. Maybe he could develop into that type of dude. Next is the Los Angeles Rams, and no shocker here. We're going to go interior offensive line. I accidentally hit the wrong thing. But I'm going to actually go with Andrew Voorhees here. I think he's played really well this year for USC. Tackle guard flexibility too, which I think, especially with what the Jets have gone through a year, I think this year, I think a lot of teams are going to start to hone in on that. And they're going to be like, hey, yeah, well, if a guy can play both positions, or if we get in a pinch, this guy can move, that's going to be big. So I like Andrew Voorhees here at 34, plug and play left guard. I think that's, kind of the safe floor. We'll see what they decide to do with Joseph Noteboom. Anton Harrison could totally be in play here as well. Also, I'm intrigued by one of the edge guys, BJ Ojulari, you see on the screen now. That could be an interesting fit just because it feels like they need another guy opposite of Leonard Floyd and helping out Aaron Donald. So that could be in play, but I think you got to fix up that offensive line first and foremost. So Voorhees stays pretty close to USC and goes and plays for the Rams. Then we get to 35, and I'm actually going to stick in the interior offensive line group. And this is going to be John Michael Schmitz. A little bit of an older prospect, fifth-year senior at Minnesota, but I just look at a guy who minimum upgraded center, or it could be an upgrade at one of the guard spots. So one of the few pieces on that offensive line right now, or few pieces in general really for Seattle's offense that I look at and I'm like, yeah, they could definitely get better there, is the interior offensive line. So let's go ahead and address that here with John Michael Schmitz, who I think is going to be a good player. And, again, 5th-year senior at Minnesota, Power 5 school. I think he's going to be ready to go and play as a rookie, which will certainly impact that decision. Then we get to the Carolina Panthers and another new name to the mock draft. So let's go to Tyler Nubin. Really impressed with his play this year at Minnesota, and I think he can be that difference-making true free safety for Carolina. They moved Jeremy Chin around. He kind of plays the strong. He can play the nickel. But, Xavier Woods, I didn't think it was a bad signing, but he's just kind of been Xavier Woods, kind of mid at best. Let's go ahead and try to get an upgrade there. And I think if you add a true ball hawk free safety into that secondary that already has a JC Horn, right? I think you're just adding that much more skill. And then I think if Nubin can be that, you can do that much more with Jeremy Chin. So it'll be interesting to see what that next coaching staff decides to do on the defensive side of the ball. I'm just as interested in that as I am interested to see what they do offensively. They're just an interesting team because there's pieces in place and they could have a quick turnaround. Can they maximize the talent that's already there, infuse it with a few extra boosts like a true free safety and like obviously the quarterback position? We took Will Levis at 5. Can they do that? If so, Panthers could be a sneaky team for the next couple of years. Anyways, let's move on to the New Orleans Saints now. I love Devon Witherspoon. I've been really impressed with him at Illinois. NFL size, and he's been one of the best Power 5 safeties. Like, the tape in production speaks for itself. So, and he's been one of the highest PFF graders as well. So, you get it from multiple places. This guy's been playing good football. Ideal NFL size, coming from a Power 5 school. And New Orleans, it's like, yeah, Marshawn Lattimore's there, and they took Paulson Adebo in the 3rd round 2 years ago, but, Adebo's kind of struggled, and Roby's not great. Lattimore has injuries. I think this is an important enough position. And if the Saints really want to, quarterback's certainly in play here. Don't let me make you think I forgot about that. Totally could be. I just think veterans ultimately the route they go. But anyways, to finish that point, I just think if this team wants to get back into the playoff mix, they'll understand, hey, we have got to have better options at corner. We have got to be able to slow down, whoever Carolina drafts. That Atlanta team that has, Drake London and a Kyle Pitts that can flex out wide. Tampa Bay, regardless of who's a quarterback, you got to slow down Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and all those weapons they have as well. So I think the cornerback position, should be high enough on the priority board, if you will, for the Saints to where, top of the 2nd round, you let it fly. So next up is the Arizona Cardinals. And, as much as you could double up here, maybe with Bijo Jalari and go double edge. We went Jared Verse in the 1st round. So I think, interior offensive line maybe could be a move here. Connor Beebe or even Luke Whippler, who we'll talk about later on, could be potentially in the mix here. But let's go Garrett Williams. Maybe he hasn't taken that insane step forward this year for Syracuse, but I still see NFL size and athletic ability. And year over year, even where it's been a little stagnant this season for Garrett Williams at Syracuse, last couple of years he's taken steps forward. So I'd be interested to see once you get him to the NFL level, can he continue that growth? Right now, obviously, Arizona's going to be an interesting organization to kind of follow, and I don't know what defense they're going to potentially try to run if they do have an organizational change. So that's what kind of makes this hard to predict. But minimum, just adding a Garrett Williams, a early day two type of talent in the mix with Byron Murphy and a Budda Baker. Feels like you could help out those two because those two are shouldering a pretty heavy load right about now. Next is the Green Bay Packers, and I'm actually going to go defensive interior here. Another name, I don't think I've had him in a mock draft yet. Keandre Coburn, who's just an absolute behemoth of a human being at 6'2", 330 plus pounds. And I think Mike Tirico and Chris Collinsworth did a great job during the Sunday night game, Packers-Eagles, where until the end of the game when they say, hey, we haven't really called out Kenny Clark's name a whole lot. That spoke volumes. It was like, unfortunately, he's kind of taking a step back. Maybe it was just that one game, right, against a really good Eagles offensive line, but that dude needs more help, right? Like, Dean Lowry ain't cutting it, right? Jaron Reed ain't cutting it. So you got to get a little bit better there. And I think if you play Coburn, ideally as a true nose, and you play Kenny Clark over at 3-tech, that could be a nice way to kind of free him up a little bit and allow him to focus solely on being a pass rusher. But Coburn's been great this year at Texas, both as a run stopper and a pass rusher, so hopefully he takes that next step forward and, gets that much better at the NFL level. But also, the Packers ran all over in that game. And now, a lot of that came from Jalen Hurts. Not like a nose tackle is going to help out much there, but adding another big beefy body there in the middle helps slow down opposing run games. That will certainly go a long way as well. And Coburn could have definitely been live for the Browns, but he's not going to be my selection, obviously, because he's taken off the board here, but I did want to throw that out as an honorable mention. Next is the Vegas Raiders. Let's go Anton Harrison Jr. here. Ideally, I think you play him at right tackle, and then I'm starting to feel a little bit better about that offensive line, but I still think that's a position group where the Raiders can get better, and basically it's kind of Colton Miller and a bunch of other people who play in the NFL. That's kind of how it's sum up that offensive line right about now. So they've been able to get it done on the run game, but they do need to get better in pass protection. I think Anton Harrison has a ton of reps already under his belt as a starter at Oklahoma. Pretty solid already as a pass protector. I think he can make that leap and potentially play, if you were to put him in pads and play him on a Sunday, I don't think he'd be a liability in pass protection. So add a little bit more strength to his profile. I think this guy becomes a really solid tackle at the NFL level. Next is the Cleveland Browns. We're going to have Kayshon Boutte come off the board here. Now I know, Anthony Schwartz is this, super speedy guy, but that's kind of the only skill set he has is being fast. Not a very refined route runner or anything. And Boutte maybe hasn't taken that insane step forward or even just in general a step forward this year that I was kind of hoping. And it's tough with the Browns here because you don't have your first round pick, so it's like, what's the most important thing I could attack here? Well, defensive interior makes a ton of sense because those DTs are just not good. A true inside linebacker, I could think about that. Another safety, I'm pondering that. But I think you go Kayshon Boutte because we'll see what it looks like with Deshaun Watson this upcoming week, but I just look at that wide receiver room and it's like, man, if you added a Boutte in there, and let's just say he plays in the slot with Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones on the outside, I'm looking at Amari Cooper can win in a variety of ways. Donovan Peoples-Jones is a fast, big body field stretcher who will win, kind of like in a Mike Williams way, but a poor man's version. And then Boutte could be that yak and speed guy who also works at the top, but also does the underneath stuff at a high level. So I think just adding that much more, even that one more weapon in that Cleveland offense kind of changes how you perceive that pass attack. Obviously, Deshaun Watson will have a huge impact on that as well. Next is the Jacksonville Jaguars. I had some fun putting Dalton Kincaid in this mock. I haven't gotten to talk about a whole lot of these tight ends, but Kincaid's a really damn good one at Utah. It has what you wanted as an athlete, and 1 year contract for Evan Ingram. The Jags are going to be looking at this position, and as you're seeing Trevor Lawrence take steps forward, I thought about wide receiver in the first round, but it's like, hey, they made the trade for Calvin Ridley, so what's my compromise here? We can go get a cornerstone potential corner at Keely Ringo at 11, and then with Calvin Ridley coming back, Christian Kirk then becomes option 2, and Zay Jones becomes option 3. Let's add a Dalton Kincaid and get an improvement at that position as a pass catcher, and then there's your 4-weapon set, right? You have Ridley, Christian Kirk, and Zay Jones as the wide receivers, Kincaid factoring in as a rookie tight end. All of a sudden, it feels like there's a solid stable of weapons for Trevor Lawrence to work with there. So really like Kincaid as a prospect. Middle of the second round feels about right for him. And, I like the fit there in Jacksonville. Then we get back to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have gone Paris Johnson Jr. in the first round at 12, and then we added a corner and Jalen Jones at the top of the second round at 33. And now we're going to go ahead and add a safety, and this is going to be your Terrell Edmunds replacement, J.L. Skinner, a guy who was in my honorable mentions for the safety position grouping, and just 6'4", an absolute mammoth of a human being. And maybe he ultimately makes that little bit of a transition to a linebacker. I'd be interested to see, which I think Pittsburgh can get better there too. Tevin Bush hasn't been all that awesome during his rookie contract. Miles Jack's already a little bit old, so maybe, but I think minimum as a box safety that Terrell Edmunds is, J.L. Skinner could be a potential upgrade, and also younger and cheaper, and also 1 year contract for Terrell Edmunds. So I think this makes sense on a lot of different beats. We get back to the Detroit Lions, and speaking of linebackers who are freak athletes, J.L. Skinner could be one. But Drew Sanders already is one. I can't think of the Arkansas game I was watching. It might have been, it was the Ole Miss game. It was the Ole Miss Arkansas game where this guy falls in a fumble, whatever. That's just kind of right place, right time. But then 2 drives later or something like that has this crazy leaping interception, and it's like, yeah, that dude looks like an athlete who could play at the NFL level, and he 100% is. So I'd love to see Drew Sanders, this freak athlete linebacker, paired up with safety turn linebacker Malcolm Rodriguez, right? Like, that would be an awesome pairing. And, I know we went quarterback early, and a lot of Lions fans are probably already clicked off the video, sorry, but, in that time since we've gone corner, defensive line, and linebacker. We have made that entire defense, one area at a time better, and also gave you a franchise quarterback. So, I think there's a pathway to being able to do that. So, let's move on to the Colts. I'm droning on about a lot of these picks. Let's go Jalen Hyatt here for Indianapolis. I think he can just kind of be what Paris Campbell isn't. So adding that burner element, but also a guy who, especially in Josh Heupel's offense, runs a lot of sticks, and they ask him to do plenty after the catch. Adding that element of the offense goes a long way, whether it's Matt Ryan or someone else. I think having him, Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce, who has been better than I expected as a rookie, all of a sudden that wide receiver room feels really well-rounded. Next to the Atlanta Falcons once more. Different ways you could go here. I'm going to go Chris Abrams-Drain. He's a little small, and that's where I'd love to see them add another physical corner on the outside to pair up with A.J. Terrell. But, Chris Abrams-Drain, let me give him credit. This guy, he was my honorable mention in the cornerback groups because he played well. but he primarily played in the slot a year ago. Now he's been able to play on the outside for Missouri, which is not a great football team. They've been okay, and I'm excited about Eli Drinkwitz moving forward as the head coach. He got an extension this year. But Abrams Drain has been able to prove, hey, I can play on the outside. So let's see what the arm length requirements, kind of like a Clark Phillips III situation where it's like, we'll see what the measurements come in at. But there's potential this guy sticks on the outside. Minimum, this team could also use an improvement at the nickel too. So I think he fits in there pretty well as well. Next, we get the Seattle Seahawks. I'm going to go with an interior defender here. Kalaji Kancey, who has been really, really good this year at Pittsburgh. If I could just hit the right position group, my lord. It's almost like I do this frequently. Let's go Kalaji Kancey. And I look at that Seattle, it's tough because I had Jalen Carter go off the board at 2, so Will Anderson was kind of put in their lap at 4. I'd love to see them get that interior disruptor, and then it kind of fits a little bit better with Uchenna Nwosu and Boye Mafe. But again, Nwosu's on the last year. Next year he'll be on his last year of a 2-year contract he just signed. So let's get Kancey in the building and let's have him be that interior potential pass rusher. And he's been great this year for Pittsburgh. Actually, even better as a run defender than he is a pass rusher, which is interesting because he's only about 6'280", which last time there was an undersized DT coming out of Pittsburgh, a lot of people doubted him, and he became one of the best defensive players in my lifetime, if not the best defensive player in my lifetime, in Aaron Donald. So I'm not saying Kancey's going to become that, but he could play beyond his size. And, also, even if he does not, translate to the next level as a high-level run defender, I think, again, let's talk about that nickel example. It's a third and long passing situation. You put this guy anywhere between that 2 and 3 tech position, basically lined up right in front of the guard. Let him go after the quarterback. I think that translates pretty quick. Like, I could see him being able to be an impact player in those passing situations as a pass rusher, which that's the name of the game, right? Get a sack in the drive, get the offense back out in the field. So totally think he fits in the mix. And now we've kind of addressed the major areas: edge, interior offensive line, corner, and then interior defender as well for the Seattle team. And it makes me feel that much better about how quick that turnaround could potentially happen. Be interested to see what they do with Geno Smith, by the way. Next up, LA Chargers. I love DeMarvin Overshown. I think he's played really well. And actually, my last mock draft, I was like, the missed tackles are starting to pile up. He had 5 against Oklahoma State. But outside of that one game, he hasn't had more than 2 missed tackles in a single game. So all in all, I've been really impressed. And he's been able to win as a pass rusher. He's been a solid run defender. And he's been good in coverage. He's also 6'4", 225. So ideal NFL size. Or actually 235, excuse me. A little light. 235. But I still think NFL body, especially at 6'4", that's awesome. And then the ability to do a lot of different things. If Brandon Staley's the head coach next year, I think he would jump all over this. And Drew Tranquill's been good, but I think you can add one more linebacker in the middle of that defense. Next up is the New England Patriots at pick number 49. We went into your offensive line earlier. If Drew Sanders fell to this spot, I think they jump all over linebacker. And Jack Campbell honestly kind of feels like a Bill Belichick type of linebacker. I'll actually go Jack Campbell. I was going to go wide receiver Zay Flowers there, but I don't really love the value where they would be getting Zay Flowers. I think he's probably a back end of the second round, early round 3 type of guy right now, but also could be a guy who tears up the Senior Bowl. So shout out to Zay Flowers from Boston College. Let's go Jack Campbell here. Let's go back-to-back linebackers, and let's just put a guy in the middle of the defense where New England feels like for a while now hasn't had that dude. If anything, they've just been kind of like, hey, Donta Hightower, why don't you come back and play for us? And they've been kind of relying on those same faces that we've had for a decade plus now in New England. Let's go get another guy. And Campbell's not necessarily this all-world athlete, but just the little things right. High football IQ and great when the play's in front of him, right? Coverage, and when he's having a back battle may not be as great. I'm interested to see how that athletic ability and coverage skill set transfers to the NFL level. But if it's in front of him, this dude can make a play. Next is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and B.J. Ojulari's slide is going to end here. Again, B.J. Ojulari is easily a top 50 player in this class, without a doubt. So for him to go exactly 50, I hate that, but it's just a stacked edge group, man. It's hard to find a place for all these guys. But Ojulari, I think, one, is Shaq Barrett going to be 100% next year, right? Wrong side of 30, getting older. All those types of concerns. Joe Tryon-Trink, I think, is starting to come along, but they needed a third edge in and of itself. And then plus you take into fact that, Barrett's out right now. Injuries could continue to be an issue. That third edge rusher becomes that much more needed. I think B.J. Ojulari could be a plug-and-play guy, can win with speed, win with finesse, and adds that much more to that defense. Next, Washington Commanders. Let's go interior offensive line, Connor Beebe. I just think this is your Andrew Norwell replacement at the worst, right? I think this is a minimum upgrade, get younger, get cheaper at that position versus Norwell. And maybe a guy who plays guard for 2 to 3 years, and then when Charles Leno's ready to hang it up, Connor Beebe plays left tackle right now for K-State. So could that be a transition in his future? I don't hate it. Kind of similar to what the Cowboys did with Tyler Smith. I think you'll see teams continue to do that a lot. I think Peter Skoronski makes sense for that. Maybe even a Paris Johnson Jr. I think he body-wise fits better at tackle, but maybe. And that's kind of what Ohio State did with him, by the way. But Connor Beebe could totally fill in that void. And in minimum, again, he's just a left guard improvement over Andrew Norwell. Next, Chicago Bears. Let's go back to the wide receiver position. Let's go Parker Washington. Might end up being a slot only at the next level, but minimum, I think he's a really solid route runner from the slot, can work those underneath intermediate stuff. Solid with the ball in his hands, can be a good yak weapon, but I think there's enough body control, and he's made enough contested catches this year where there might be even more to gain out of that. So add him into the room. Let's just say he's going to play the slot, and then you have Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool on the outside. Two young, explosive, speedy wide receivers who can win in different ways. One with route running, one with physicality. And then you add Parker Washington in the mix, and all of a sudden, you got a nice young trio there to build up with Justin Fields. Back to the New York Jets. Let's have some fun here. This would be one of my favorite draft classes this year could possibly have if the Jets were to land Trenton Simpson in the first round and then Hendon Hooker in the second. Now, obviously, Hendon Hooker, torn ACL. He's out for the rest of the year for Tennessee, and he's going to be 25 in January. Like, literally a month away. He's going to start turning 25. So that's a tough sell. But just outside the top 50, I look at a New York team that's like, man, this is why I keep saying I think Jimmy Garoppolo's their quarterback next year. Just because you look at Mike White versus Zach Wilson, it's like, Mike White wasn't a great quarterback. He was just a better facilitator. Like, he let Garrett Wilson, he hit the throw, which is big, but Garrett Wilson then makes the play happen after that. And, he was just doing those little things. And like Robert Saleh said, he made the easy stuff look easy. And that's just something we haven't seen from Zach Wilson. I think that's something that Hendon Hooker, as an older quarterback who's gotten a ton of college experience, maybe he's not this takeover Josh Allen, Pat Mahomes, win you a game at any moment, can score in 13 seconds, that type of stuff. But maybe he's just that cheap facilitator. I'll get the ball out. It'll be like a nice floor general in the NBA or something like that, where it's just like, hey, yep, I can trust the people around me, get the ball out quick, let's roll as an offense. And then you put him in that Shanahan-esque system with Michael Ford. I think there's potential there. This could even set up a situation where it's like Jimmy Garoppolo signs a 1-year deal, and he's kind of the bridge for Hendon Hooker. Or if they don't get a Jimmy Garoppolo, he goes to Tampa Bay or Vegas, whatever. Reunites with Josh McDaniels there. They bring in a Jacoby Brissett, or they bring in a Teddy Bridgewater, whatever the case may be, and then Hendon Hooker sits behind them as they're the bridge. So I think that could work out in a lot of different ways there. Anyways, let's move on to the Bengals. We went Bijan Robinson earlier, and we're going to continue to add some offensive firepower. You want to add another good athlete in the mix? Let's go Luke Musgrave. He's obviously hurt right now for Oregon State, but the two games we did get to see, you see the athleticism and you see enough route running ability and soft hands. So I like a lot of what his potential says he can be. And then also, I think this is just a position where the Bengals can get potentially better. And again, asking the question, hey, let's say there's a world where they pay Burrow and Chase, but not Higgins. Well, where's that production going? How about an upgrade at tight end? How about even if it's only marginal, but a potential upgrade at running back with Bijan Robinson? I think that's how you kind of facilitate that production around and make sure it's not just on one single player. Anyways, next up, New York Giants. We're going to go to the cornerback position, a name I have not actually talked about. Emmanuel Forbes, 6 foot 180, so I'm a little worried about that size. I'd like to be a little bit bulkier, but nonetheless, he's really stood out this year for Mississippi State, been a nice player at that quarterback spot, and doing it in the SEC, which is always impressive. And then you look at Wink Martindale and that Giants defense, they need that number one corner, and Wink Martindale's scheme in specific, he needs man press type. So I don't necessarily if Forbes is going to be that just because of his size, but looking at a position they could potentially target here, throwing out a name I haven't talked about yet, Emmanuel Forbes, somebody should certainly, get paid to talk, should certainly be on your radar this upcoming draft cycle and could be a fit there for the Giants. And I think the second round, maybe even in the first round at 24, that's totally live. I think corner is going to certainly be high on the priority list, if you will, for the Giants this offseason, free agency and draft alike. Then we get back to the Carolina Panthers, and let's go. Well, this could go a few different ways. Let's go Will McDonald IV here. Thought about corner potentially. We've already added a safety and Tyler Newman, so let's go edge. Let's go edge with Will McDonald. Thought about again corner here, but getting someone who can help Brian Burns, right? Like Yetur Gross-Matos, unfortunately, that's just not taking that step forward. And I liked him a ton coming out of Penn State. Huge, strong, physical type of edge, and it just hasn't really worked out. I like him as an ideal complement to Brian Burns. Will McDonald, only about 236 pounds, so I don't know if he'll be that big physical type, but hey, if he wins on the edge, then he wins on the edge, and he's been playing really well for Iowa State here in the middle of the second round, late second round for that point. This would be a solid place to add him, and then you look at Carolina, it's like, hey, we've added a safety, we've got our franchise quarterback, now we've added another edge, that defense feels really well-rounded, and now we got our franchise guy that hopefully can find Terrence Marshall Jr., DJ Moore, yada, yada, yada. So hopefully that team can be able to be pretty competitive with just one draft under their belt. Next, the Tennessee Titans. I'm going to actually stick to the well with edge, go Byron Young. A little bit smaller than McDonald, right around 230 pounds, but similar stuff where he's just played really well at the SEC level and good burst off the edge, excuse me. And, Tennessee, you're getting a lot of production over Rashad Weaver, Danico Autry, which speaks to how good Mike Vrabel is just putting these guys in the right spot and scheming it up well. But it also is like, okay, well, we're paying a lot of money to Harold Landry and Bud Dupree, and potential outs are not too far away. So I think planning for the future, adding an edge here in the second round, maybe you wait another year before you move on from one or potentially even both those guys. Maybe it's Dupree next year and then Landry in 2 years' time. Maybe it's the other way around, who knows? But I think planning for the future would be a wise decision there for Tennessee so they can shed some cap and then use that money elsewhere. Then we get to the Dallas Cowboys. We went defensive line Siaki Ika earlier. Now I'm actually going to go interior offensive line Luke Whippler. He's just been awesome this year for Ohio State. You look at his PFF grades, 90 plus in pass protection or very close to it. And same thing with run protection. I mean, he's just been great. And, that's ideal size, right around 300 pounds, a little over 6 foot. I mean, just the making of a potential NFL center and a damn good one at that. So, could be a potential upgrade over Tyler Biadasz, or just gives you more flexibility. Maybe you can move Biadasz, maybe you don't, I just think preparing for the inevitability of one having to move on from Biadasz, having that replacement in place is always going to go a long way, but also just a potential upgrade. And you think of Zeke Elliott running up the middle, right? Think about keeping Dak Prescott healthy. That's an important position in the middle of that offensive line. And I think about the best years Dallas has had. That offensive line's good now, but the best years were when Travis Frederick was right there in the middle, kind of anchoring it all and calling out everything from the middle. So if they can get a guy like that, maybe Whitefleur is that dude. That offense could get that much more scary. Then we get to the Buffalo Bills at 59. It feels like this is a team that doesn't have obviously they don't have a whole lot of holes. I mean, there's a reason they are one of the best teams in the AFC in my preseason pick to win the Super Bowl. Let's go Blake Freeland here, 6'8", massive human being. Gives me a lot of Mike McGlinchey vibes. Maybe not the most sound pass protector, but can move people in the run game. So you see that strength and you see that size. And I think this is kind of your Spencer Brown contingency plan right now. Is doesn't have great grades. Has also missed time with injuries and was coming from Northern Iowa. Just a smaller school in and of itself. So I think this is your contingency. Now, granted, Freeland's coming from BYU, also a smaller school, but I think it's just your just in case. And then maybe even Brown can kick inside to play some guard. I think the best skill set Brown had was being physical and having a lot of strength on top of pretty solid size and athletic ability. Freeland's just a little bit of a different player, but that could complement and kind of fill in some of that offensive line holes that you have. Then we get to Miami at 60, and I mean, Mike Gesicki is just not really a fit at tight end for what Mike McDaniel wants, considering you're thinking, okay, who could be a George Kittle type? Well, I'm not saying Darnell Washington's going to be George Kittle, but he's a much, much better blocker than Mike Gesicki is. But he's also an awesome athlete. He can get out and run, even if it's just, out in the flat. Even if that's all he is in this offense. Let him turn up the field and use that athletic ability and good speed, too. So I think this is a great fit. This is one of my favorite second-round fits here in this video. So love that addition, and it kind of just gives Mike McDaniels that last little thing he's looking for on the offensive side. And that run game's already pretty crazy. If he had a blocking tight end in the mix, you look out. It's only going to be that much harder to contain. Then we get to the Lions at 61. Another defensive interior guy. I'm starting to show some love for this class. Part of it's also I just haven't talked about these names, so I kind of want to talk about them here, trying to do some different things. But Kobe Turner, transfer from the University of Richmond, which if you didn't know, it's actually where I'm from. But former Spider, goes to Wake Forest, and the grades look pretty much identical. And he had like 10 pressures against Clemson in that game earlier this year. So he's not only been really good for Wake, but he's shown up in some of their biggest games this year. So a little bit undersized. He's a little bigger than Kancey is, but still when you compare him to a Siaki Ika, they're two different types of bodies. But love to see that interior defensive line take another step forward, right? And we've already added to a lot of different pieces to this Lions defense. And, Lee McNeil over the last couple of weeks has been really, really good. I'd love to see him stick at nose tackle, to be honest with you. And then maybe Kobe Turner can be that 3-tech for this defensive line. But yeah, just adding some more reinforcements, some more talent, right? And especially if Levi Onwuzurike doesn't live up to his second round potential, this could be your another option. Throw another dart at that board in a similar spot in the draft. 2 more picks to go. Kansas City Chiefs, they find a way to make do with the corners they have, but I'd still love to see them add another one. And obviously they just drafted Trent McDuffie, but I think Tyreek Stevenson's been solid this year at Miami. 6 foot, 190. I've talked about him in multiple mock drafts. Just a good, solid prospect right now. Once we know more about his measurements and those types of things, it'll make him that much more potential. Where he moves on the board will be dictated by, his 40 time and all that sort of stuff. But I've been impressed with him this year at Miami. And, for Kansas City, it's just like, hey, you can never have too many cornerback options, whether it's injuries or teams are playing from behind and chucking around the yards. We need to have a stable rotation of people coming in and out. I think that's something that's a worthwhile investment. So Tyreek Stevenson, I think fits in at least in that rotation there at the end of the second round. And then for the Philadelphia Eagles, Jahmyr Gibbs. I would just love, and let's actually talk about some of the other running backs. Blake Corum just had I think his season's now done for Michigan. He's going to undergo surgery, but he's been awesome this year for the Wolverines. I don't know if I like him more than Gibbs, but Sean Tucker's the one guy where maybe you could convince me him over Gibbs. Devin Achane's going to be an animal, but he's going to be probably third round to fourth round type of dude, all speed, actually runs for Texas A&M track and field program. But let's go Jahmyr Gibbs. Can run with power, has enough juice, a little bit of wiggle, and a great pass catcher too. So it's been great to see him have a ton of success this year for the Crimson Tide. But that'll do it for my updated 2023 NFL mock draft. I'll let you look at it one more time, but let me hear your thoughts down below in the comment section. Who do I have going too high? Who do I have falling too low? Who's your favorite team? What prospects do you like? What needs do you think they could potentially have on the table if you don't like my selection? Tell me what other position groups you think they could be targeting. I'd love to have your thoughts. I love talking football with you guys. So comment your takes. I'll respond to them. We'll have a nice conversation down below. And hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. If you're still watching, I really do appreciate that. Also hit the subscribe button if you are new. But I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I am signing off.